How's it going, everybody? I'm Rob Clark, and I figured this is a good time to talk to everybody about egg laying with the reticulated python, since I'm in the process of watching a female lay eggs. Basically, she's probably past halfway there. She's making good progress. But when I talk about these girls really starving themselves, you can sort of see through here the ribs showing. And the reason the ribs are showing right there is because that's where the eggs are, and they're inside the rib cage pushing outward against the ribs. But if you look through here, there's no ribs showing. And this is a good way that you guys can tell if you've never bred retics before or any other python. You can sort of use this area as a guide or a way of knowing whether or not your female is done laying eggs, because this process is so slow, so painstaking, that sometimes there's barely any movement. One thing I recommend or suggest is definitely not disturbing the female. I wouldn't want to touch her in any way, because that can startle them and cause them to think maybe a predator's trying to steal the eggs. So they might stop laying eggs for a little while, and if they do that, it can cause them to become egg bound or have complications, or maybe they just delay laying the eggs, but still that could cause problems with the eggs, because this is time. This is when they're supposed to come out. Another thing is to occasionally just take photographs of the female and see if she's moved. If you know approximately how long it takes her to lay each egg, then just take photographs to see what her progress is and to see if anything's changed. When you check back in on her, you can look to see, okay, we've got more eggs, or okay, she's moved around a lot. Normally when they get done laying their eggs and they position themselves on the clutch, there's not going to be any more movement. They typically lay really still, and they'll maintain that position for hours on end. For the most part, you're looking for loose skin from here and throughout the body all the way down to the cloaca. When you see the bulge like that, you know there's still eggs in there, and you know she's not done yet. So keep that in mind when your future breeding endeavors take place. If you're not sure whether it's time to collect your eggs or not, better safe than sorry. Always give them just a little bit extra time. Something I always avoid and I don't recommend is putting wet eggs in the incubator. That's just a personal preference. I don't know that it would really cause any harm or damage to the eggs, but the skin on the eggs isn't dry, so it's not fully developed, and it may be more susceptible to things like bacteria and infection. So I've just always had a personal preference to leave eggs alone until they're dry. Now you can kind of see I've gone in here and marked some of them with a Sharpie, and I just put little dashes on top, and that is mainly so I know where the top of that egg should be, so when I put it into the incubator it has the same orientation so that the right side is up. That way the egg hasn't been turned. If the egg gets turned, then as you may know, that can cause the egg to die, because once these eggs are laid and the skin dries, everything situates inside that egg in a way that it's supposed to be until that egg hatches. Unlike chicken eggs and duck eggs, python and reptile eggs in general don't get turned. They stay in the same position for however long it takes for them to incubate, which with these guys, I incubate slow, so it takes nearly 90 days for the eggs to hatch. I generally start cutting eggs around 84 days. But sometimes they'll sit in the eggs for a few extra days even after I've cut the eggs, because they have to, you know, absorb the nutrients from the egg and get their lungs dry to where they can breathe fresh air independent from the egg. I apologize if you can hear the roosters in the background, but my shop is right in front of my little chicken and rooster farm. So this girl's been at it for about 5 or 6 hours now. Still not done, but still making progress. I still see some movement, some slow wiggling, some repositioning, shifting every once in a while. So I'll check back on her in just a little while, see if she's made any more progress, or see if she's changed her body positioning to see if we get any more eggs produced from her, which I'm sure we will. And like I say, the only hope, or the only fear is really that they may become egg bound during this process. Right there's a nice big bulge. So we definitely have some more eggs inside. Hopefully she'll pass those along on her own without any intervention or assistance. Okay everybody, so as you can see there's some more movement. She's definitely moving around. You can see more of the eggs exposed. And she's repositioning her body, preparing to push another egg out. She had her tail underneath a portion of her abdomen, but that wasn't any good. That wasn't helping her get the eggs out, so she's pulled her tail out from underneath herself, and she's positioned her cloaca near her face. She's about to push another egg out. I see the posterior area swelling and stretching, and when they're pushing an egg out, they'll basically use some of the same motions they use when they're using the bathroom. It's very, very similar. You might see a little bit of wiggling and writhing, and they're basically squeezing with the ribs to try and force out the eggs. And again, you can see in the light right here how the ribs are just bulging through the skin. I think she laid that one egg, so we'll check back in a few minutes and see if she's laid any more. I just checked the time on this, and so far it's been over 6 hours since she started this process. There went the egg. Barely caught that on video. But we'll check back in a few minutes to see if she lays any more. So there's just a few more things to say and discuss while we're at this stage in the process. At this point, you should definitely have a box for the eggs ready. Now, if you have an incubator close by, a box may or may not be necessary unless you plan on putting that particular box in the incubator. For me, my situation, I have different buildings. They're in separate, slightly separate locations. So I have to put these eggs in a box and carry them to a different building where the incubator is located. And also, there's certain things you should do with the female after she's laid eggs. Once you know she's done and it's safe to remove her from the enclosure, you should inspect her body and feel for lumps and make sure she's not egg bound. Sometimes up near the ovaries there may be an egg stuck about 1/3 of the way up the body, and on a smaller snake you can usually feel that manually by palpating, and on a larger female you may have trouble feeling an egg inside the abdomen of a 100+ pound reticulated python. But at any rate, something else I do is I go ahead and weigh the animal, so I know how light they are and how much weight they need to gain, because I weigh my animals when they're in breeding, and I try to weigh them about monthly. And this just helps me know how much weight should this animal gain when I get her back on food. Now, this particular animal has been somewhat stressed during her, I say pregnancy, but while she's been gravid. And you can hear her breathing, and she's opening her mouth a little bit. She does have some respiratory infection, possibly pneumonia. So another step I'm going to take is to medicate her with Baytril just as soon as I get these eggs pulled. And I will also start getting some quick, easy, very fatty nutrition in her and I will start that later today just to have some calories in her to build up some strength, help her get her fat reserves going again, and it also helps to stimulate her appetite. Sitting around watching these girls lay eggs and waiting for the eggs to be laid is literally like watching paint dry. It's very, very tedious work, but it's very rewarding. Now, you may have noticed that in this enclosure, I don't have a nest box. For whatever reason, some people prefer them, some people don't. I've tried it with and without nest boxes, and I say to each his own. If you think a nest box will work better for you, by all means use one. I have tried nest boxes and they've worked. I've done just fine without nest boxes. So again, it's personal preference. I don't see that I get any better results with it versus without it. One thing I can say sometimes that I find is that having a nest box, it becomes unnecessary clutter depending on the cage or enclosure dimensions. Sometimes the animal can get wedged behind it, and if it's a tight fit, that can be a hazard for the animal because she may put pressure on the eggs internally and cause one to bust. So you want to be very careful about the dimensions of the nest box. I'm watching her closely because she's moving around and she's about to pass another egg. I'll see if I can get this on video. She's definitely moving her lower abdomen just above the cloaca. She's applying some pressure. You can see her squeezing and pushing to try and get that egg out. And that may be the last egg. She's looking really thin on the rest of her body. Once she gets this egg out, I'll give her a few minutes to rest and follow my own advice. I'll take a picture and I'll watch her closely to see if there's any more eggs or any movement. And if nothing else happens in the next, we'll say 20-30 minutes, then I'll feel like maybe it's safe to go ahead and collect these eggs. Now, in collecting eggs, you've probably seen a lot of videos on how that's done. For me, I've never really had an aggressive female, and a lot of that I believe is due to the fact that I try to collect the eggs as soon as possible, right after that very last egg is dried. And the reason I do this is because in my experience, the females become more protective as they've sat on the eggs longer and longer. If you take the eggs away a little sooner, say for example as soon as that last egg dries, then they tend to be less defensive and more cooperative. Now, some of the things that they'll still do is push and thrust with their bodies, and they may squeeze the clutch and passively protect the eggs, but it's not a flying teeth situation where you're likely to be bitten. Always use caution. Alright, I believe we're going to get the very last egg laid on video. Yep, I'm seeing it. There it is, folks. Okay guys, here we go. Final results 28 good healthy eggs. She did lay one slug. I've checked her out, I've weighed her, and everything seems to be perfectly good. She doesn't have any eggs left inside her, so maybe we can get a respiratory infection straightened out and maybe she'll be good to go for a while. Worth mentioning though, she has lost 23 pounds since the last time I weighed her, right when she started to breed. So some of that's going to come from these 28 eggs, but some of it just comes from the fact of not eating. So what I know I need to do is get at least 23 pounds of weight back on her before I can expect her to breed again. But I'm going to get these guys in the incubator, and if you're wondering what to expect from them, out of these 28 eggs, the odds, the way it works out, all the eggs will be orange glow, every single one of them. Remember, mom is a white albino, daddy is a caramel motley, and the mom is a tiger. So 25% of the clutch, which would be roughly 7 eggs, will turn out to be just normal orange glows. 7 eggs should turn out to be orange glow tigers, 7 orange glow motley, and hopefully at least 7 orange glow motley tigers. Now that's just the odds. It could turn out to be 7, 8, 9, and 6, or 5 and 4, and then 12, and you just have to understand that the odds don't always play out. But everything will be orange glow. So I'll get these in the incubator. Sometimes I get asked, how do I incubate my eggs? And the answer is, I use a sim container, and I put a little bit of water in the bottom of the sim container beneath this platform. There's a factory platform that comes with sim containers, but then I also use the fluorescent lighting or egg crate platform to sort of give some extra elevation above the water. And I never fill this thing up too much, because if you're new to this, you definitely don't want to ever let your eggs get wet. So I just place the eggs in here. This holds about 8, and I've got 4 set up ready to go. So we're good for the 28 eggs that we've produced, and I'll get them in here and then we'll start the incubation process. Okay, these eggs turned out to be a little smaller than expected. Sometimes with bigger eggs I only get 8 in, but with this size egg I was able to get 10 in comfortably. And this one has 9, and this one has 9, so that gives us a grand total of 28 eggs. The reason I was thinking too I use this type of incubation is because I've tried vermiculite and perlite in the past, and they work fine. However, the 2 problems I have found with those substrates for incubation: one, if you get it too wet or too moist, it has the same effect as getting your eggs wet, and they will die if there's too much moisture. But you can never really have too much humidity. I have found that as much humidity as you can have is a good thing. 95 to 100% works great. But with vermiculite and perlite, if it's too wet, then your eggs are basically wet, and that's where they start to die. The other issue with perlite and vermiculite is once it gets dry, you have to take the eggs out and remix a little water. But with this situation, with this setup, I rarely ever have to add water to these tubs. There's usually enough water in here that it lasts the entire incubation period, so the eggs can be, for the most part, left undisturbed. I'll check in on them every once in a while, make sure none of them have gone bad, and for the most part I've been having really great success with this type of incubation process, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. Now, just so you know, these do come with lids, and they're pretty nice. And this is purchased from the company's called Sim Container. You can look them up on Instagram. They're out of New York, and that's where I purchased these containers from. So that's it. That's an incubator full of eggs. I've still got over 20 or so from the previous clutch incubating, and now 28 new ones. So look forward to an egg cutting video in about 3 weeks, maybe a little bit less. Here at Rob Clark Pythons, expect big things.